Okay, today I want to talk about your survival response. And what I mean by that is that the different stresses in your life over the years of your life forced you to respond in a particular way to recover and to cope, even. And of course, you've managed to do that, otherwise, you wouldn't be here now listening to this. So you got there. Unfortunately, some of those responses aren't exactly very beneficial, especially if the trauma or the stress in your life, big stress, which we call a trauma, was pretty big and quite could have been torture or abuse or terror or prolonged neglect, deep grief for whatever reason. You found ways to cope, and which came from your survival brain, because surviving is the number one thing. And the definition of a major trauma is that for a second you feel like you may die. And of course, as a child, there's more chances of that happening. And also, a lot of these traumas come back to that period, but it can be at any time in your life. But the thing is, you found ways to cope. You had triggered a survival response in your body, which is the survival brain, that lower brain, and the emotional brain on top of that to cope. And you used them to great effect. They may not have been the best option, but they were the best you could do at the time, and it worked. Otherwise, like I said, you wouldn't be here now listening to me. Now, if you manage to survive all that, we call you a survivor. Now, with that survival response, that became the go-to in order to survive. The problem with that is that it will also trigger when that stressor in your life or that caused the original problem shows up even a little bit or a little hint of it in the environment, and then your body responds like it's the big one. And we call that an overreaction, when you overreact to a certain person or people or thing or whatever it is. That overreaction becomes a problem, and then people think that that's your personality. And really, of course, that's all changeable. There's nothing in that that's etched in stone. All that can be changed. So if you think back to some of the ways that you did cope, and I'll rattle off some of them here, they may be familiar. So when you got that major issue, the major trauma, major stress in your life, survival response kicked in, and that could have been you hiding. If I look at my list here: fighting, attacking, running to safety, rebelling, shrinking, fantasizing, escaping, drugs, alcohol, for example, daydreaming will get you through it, inflated ego, having a big ego, think, oh, I'm better than all this, and, studying, keep putting your head into more work and more reading, and staying up there in your head to distract yourself, and distracting, like I just said, is another one. Overworking, most common one there. People just keep working, because if they stop, they'll feel what's there. And pleading, another one, pleading for help. So they're some of the typical things that your survival brain would have triggered in order to try and save you from whatever the threat was. Now, in order to clear that, you can't clear it with your top brain, the intellect brain. That's just using willpower, and that's no long-term solution. You can overdo it for a little while, but eventually that survival brain, if it sees that stressor or any sign of that stressor in the environment, for example, you've got to give a public talk and you've got to appear in public, bang, your body will kick into gear to do what it did back then to survive, and that's not going to help because it's not appropriate for the current environment, and the stressor isn't really that big. But your brain, because it got triggered and the fight-flight response is still there, is firing off, and then you're overreacting. And so in order to change that, you've really got to access the two lower brains. We can't do that just by talking like this. You have to close your eyes, go into a body-based somatic-led process where we're contacting that, switching off the intellect a little bit, calming the back seat, listening to what the lower brain has to say about the situation, connecting that with the part in your body, which is either the running or fighting or fleeing or pushing, and and then you've got access, and by accessing that, you then slowly discharge the excess emotion, the excess unfinished response in there to saving you, to surviving you in a way, having you survive. And then once that discharges enough, then you've got an access point to bring in new options as an adult now, what you know best, other better ways to cope. Trying to do this with the intellect, like I said, very hard to do. So a deep body-based process is the best way to go, to access it, to feel it, to let it discharge, and then you can connect it to everything else that you know. Then your intellect can come in and change the response for when should that event happen again in your life, that circumstance. Okay, hope that helps. Check out my website, relaxmind.com, for a lot more. I've got lots of great tracks to help you through that process yourself, to do it at home, and heal things that you just can't heal just by talking. Okay, see you again.